Thank you very much. So for our final panel today, we're going to talk about what's next for AI, looking forward a little bit. I've got a great set of panelists, so let me start with Michael Adams, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Docusign, was previously a CISO at Zoom, and a graduate of the Naval Academy and an advisor to two chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Next to Michael, we have Congressman Obernolte, who, among other things, besides being a video game developer and a business owner, has a graduate level degree in AI. We have Representative Lieu, who, among other things, is a retired Air Force colonel and has a computer science degree, so I'm starting to feel pretty intimidated. Dan Diasio is the global AI lead for Ernst & Young. And maybe to start, just start the conversation, let's talk about what, from the private sector side, Dan and Michael, if you could talk a little bit about what you see coming up for artificial intelligence in the enterprise space.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. First off, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here, especially amongst the distinguished panel we have. I think the biggest thing we're seeing right now is a shift from experimentation to real enterprise-grade investment and transformation, right? It is that idea. There were conversations earlier about how do we get folks to try this and how do we do that? I think at an enterprise level, we are seeing a deep commitment to responsibly rolling out AI, understanding the right use cases that provide the most value, tapping into the tools and up-leveling the skills in order to be able to do so, and then really driving measurable results, right? What are those tangible results you can get to demonstrate the value across the workforce? And there are layers we can unpack with that, but that's where I'd start.
Dan?
Yeah, Michael, I completely agree with you. I would say it's been about 3 years since ChatGPT blasted onto the scene, and many companies have done the experimentation. And what that often looks like is, let's say if you have a 56-step process for how you execute something, somebody in the team looks through those 56 steps and identifies this one here, that one there. Those are the areas where AI will drive a lot of value. But I do see many companies starting to pivot from this approach where using AI was innovation, and now they're starting to pivot to what we do with AI is the innovation. And that often means that they take those 56 steps and they just throw them out and say, like, what would it look like if with the same inputs and the same outputs, we looked like an AI native startup in the way that we ran this particular function? That's where you bring things like agentic AI into the mix, and they start to really reinvent business processes. And this brings a lot of question around, you know, what it looks like to scale, but I think many companies are finding that is the recipe for greater value creation for their shareholders.
So, Congressman Obernolte, Congressman Lieu, you both ran the bipartisan House AI task force, and you obviously have expertise of your own in addition to what you were hearing on the task force. As you hear about how companies are developing and deploying AI within enterprises, what does the pace of it have an effect on what you think about in terms of legislation moving forward? Congressman Obernolte.
Absolutely it does. And I think it really colors the discussion about the regulation of artificial intelligence, because on the one hand, we always want to be very deliberate. We want to engage our stakeholders, and we want to understand the landscape of something before we seek to regulate it, because the consequences of a misstep in regulation are so substantial. But on the other hand, you have to balance that against the fact that the pace of AI adoption is so rapid and continues to accelerate. And so we want to make sure that we do a good job of balancing those two different approaches. We want to, make sure that we're doing a good job and that we're creating a light touch regulatory scheme that at the same time protects Americans against the malicious use of AI. But we want to do it at the speed that needs to be done to make sure that everyone knows what the rules are. And that's the problem that we find ourselves in right now, is that the pace of government sometimes does not match the pace of industry. And the worst thing that could happen is if we come out with a set of regulatory rules and then next year we change them and next year we change them again. That's not good for investment. That's not setting the stage for American success in AI development and deployment. And we want to make sure we avoid those mistakes.
Congressman Lieu.
Thank you, Aaron, for moderating this panel and BSA for hosting it. I'm a recovering computer science major, so I'm always excited to talk about technology and AI. I agree with what Congressman Obernolte said, and the task force we led was bipartisan, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans, and we all agreed unanimously on over 80 recommendations, a number of which can be translated into legislation fairly easily. So there is a lot of work we can do on a bipartisan basis that if we just had some floor time, I think we can put in some sensible regulations that will help move America forward and also reduce the risks of AI.
So one of the things that's really important to enterprise AI is making sure that there's trust and responsibility built in both the way it's developed and the way it's deployed. Michael, for Docusign, you're integrating AI models into systems and your customers are using them. What do you want to know from an AI model developer, and what do your customers want to know from you?
I want to know a lot, and so do they, right? As a starting point, let me emphasize that at Docusign, we apply a lot of rigor to the development of AI for our customers, for our own internal use, and even how we apply it in defense against threat actors in the malicious space, right? And so from my standpoint, when I look at it, we start with some fundamental questions about data provenance, right? Where did you get this data? What are its sources? How's it been treated? How do you protect against things like prompt injections, right? What's the rigor that's there? Are you applying OWASP top 10 for LLMs without getting into all the acronyms, right? Threat models, right, that help you look at the top 10 risks you should consider within a secure development lifecycle. These are the types of foundational questions that we are always going to ask ourselves and ensure that we are working through in our own SDL, but we also apply those to the vendors we leverage, right? Whether we're going to build on top of a model or leverage something exclusively, there's a certain level of rigor that we're going to have to apply every single time.
So Dan, let me ask you, one of the things as we were walking out here, the managing partner of Ernst & Young had her part of the CEO series on AI adoption, and one of the things I heard her talking about was how important it is to have AI unleash the ability of companies in different industry sectors. What do you see as the difference between companies that are adopting AI responsibly and those that are still sort of in the pilot phase of it?
Yeah. So I love Julie's comments. She was talking a lot about breakthrough innovation, and a lot of what we see our role in this space is to help our clients figure out how they can go forward with confidence and accelerate with confidence. I would say that just about every company, we recently did a survey asking people, workers, how excited they were to use AI as part of their work. And 85% of them were very optimistic about how they could use AI to start to drive their job. But many of them still had questions on what they were supposed to do and what they were not supposed to do with the tools. So I would say most companies are now on this journey to build training program on what to use, what not to use, whether or not you can upload data to this particular model or that particular model, and how companies can start to build a governance process over what they do. That is becoming basic table stakes, I would say. For the really cutting edge companies, those companies that are now starting to think about how they reinvent some of their work, everybody sees risk management as a brake, but they kind of see it like a Formula One driver does. That if you don't have brakes, you cannot go fast. And what they've done is they've taken a lot of their frameworks that often used to be in PowerPoints or in governance councils and have started to turn that into code. Because as you give AI the ability to operate and make decisions, you have to be able to, at the same time it's making those decisions, apply the risk management principles. So the tech stack, if you think about it, there's this platform and infrastructure stack. There's a data and intelligence stack, and there's this entirely new stack that didn't exist 12 months ago called this control panel. And many companies the really leading edge companies are figuring out how do we take our risk management policies and principles and turn them into code so we can enforce that at the same time that the AI is starting to run some of those processes.
So Congressman Lieu and then Congressman Obernolte, as you hear what companies are doing or you talk to them about what practices they're developing, what gives you either comfort or concern about what you hear them doing?
So there's 27 million use cases for AI. So it's hard to answer that in the abstract. It's a little bit like saying, let's say this was a whole panel discussion on software. Well, what do you say about that? Well, it's really hard because that's so huge and massive. So some of the questions I would ask is essentially requiring whatever model you're using to look at the way they tested it and what the model cards showed and the disclosures, and if there are risks that they put out that you think for your company are not great, then maybe you might not want to use that model, you might want to use a different model. But all these large language model companies do testing and disclosure, and they put this out there for you to read. And so have someone in your company read that and then determine if this is a good model or not for you to use.
That's fair. Congressman Obernolte?
Well, if we could trust that every company would deploy AI safely and responsibly, then we wouldn't have to regulate at all. So really, as lawmakers, it's our job to figure out what is the role of federal government in ensuring the responsibility and the safety of AI. And to do our jobs, we have to understand what the risks of AI are. And that's really complicated because what's become abundantly clear, especially if you look at the risk management framework that NIST put out last year, is that the risks of AI deployment are highly contextual, meaning that it matters very much what you're going to do with the AI when you're going to figure out what the risks of deploying it are. And that's critically important because it means that something that's unacceptably risky in one usage context might be completely benign in another. So that's why one of the things the task force is recommending is a sectoral approach to regulation, where we rely on our sectoral regulators like the FDA to recognize that the risks of AI in software in a pacemaker, for example, are going to be completely different than the risks of AI in a chatbot. Right? Both of them have risks, but they're very different. And the FDA has spent decades in figuring out what the risks are when you look at deploying a medical device, and AI is just an extension of that. So, once you have that framework in place, then you can make some holistic decisions about how to mitigate those risks. But it's very important to understand what the risks are first, because if we set out to regulate for the purpose of regulating, then we're on a fool's errand. It has to be to mitigate the specific risks of deployment. And, I think the companies that are deploying understand that as well.
Yeah, so the context really does matter, and so it might give one comfort if you know that they're going through that risk management process to figure out what is my use case. As Michael was saying, what do I need to know from the model developer in order to feel comfortable putting it in, and then I also need to know that the way I am further training it is something that my customer is going to be comfortable with as well. Whereas if they just don't do any of that, that wouldn't be good. Can I go back to you, Congressman Obernolte, and talk, because you were talking about the task force. You were both talking about the task force, 273-page report and 80 recommendations on policies. If you could pick out two or three that you think are either the most important or the most viable, or some combination of those two, could I get each of your views on what those would be?
Sure. So we just talked about sectoral regulation. You wouldn't think that that is a policy decision, but it really is, because we are in a regulatory landscape where entities like the European Union have taken a very different and more centralized approach. And so basically they are spinning up a brand new bureaucracy with its own parallel licensing requirement, treating AI as its own special thing. And we don't think that that's a good fit for our U.S. system of regulation. And so that's one thing that we'd like to codify, is this sectoral approach. And then preemption would be my other answer. Right now we have over 1,000 bills on the topic of AI regulation pending in state legislatures across the country. And that's just this year that those have been introduced. And in one way, it's appropriate for states to be doing this because they have their own regulatory lane. But on the other hand, Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution very clearly gives Congress the prerogative in regulating interstate commerce. And for all of the folks in this room, imagine how disastrous it would be if every time you wanted to go deploy AI, you had to comply with this patchwork of 50 different state regulations. 50 different states going in different directions. I mean, to be honest, that's really destructive to entrepreneurialism, because the people with the legal sophistication to deal with a landscape that complex are the big established companies, and the people that don't have the ability to deal with that are two people in a garage somewhere trying to start the next Meta or the next Google. So we need to make sure that we set out what the preemptive guardrails are. You know, what is interstate commerce and therefore preempted for regulation by Congress and Congress only, and then where are the lanes for state regulators to innovate and be the laboratories of democracy that they always have been. But the federal government has to go first. Congress has to go first, and you know, we have the responsibility of making it very clear to everyone what those guardrails are. And it is critically important because state legislatures are already out ahead on this issue.
Congressman.
I think testing and disclosure are really important. Most of the large language model companies test their models and then they disclose the results. So for example, OpenAI has found that some of their models engage in what is called strategic deception, where the models will do things that are not aligned with user intent. Anthropic has gotten some of their models to blackmail the user or to try to report the user to authorities. They thought the user was behaving immorally. So all of this is sort of interesting if it's writing an essay for you about World War II that you hand into your history professor, right? But we're entering the era of AI agents now, where you have AI products doing stuff in the real world for you. And what happens when one of those agents goes rogue? Well, they could actually empty your bank account. They might make something up about you and report you to authorities. So I think it's important to continue to have testing and disclosure and have these companies do that. And then second is sort of a issue I want you to think about. If you're, let's say, in physics and you're a cutting-edge frontier physicist and you want to use a particle accelerator to test your experiment, what if all of them were owned by private sector companies? Would we have a problem with that? We might, and that's what we have now. So if you are a academic or someone in government who wants access to a frontier advanced LLM language model, you can't get it unless a private sector company lets you have it. And so there is the concept of something called NAIR, the National AI Research Resource, that would provide essentially advanced compute power to academics and people in government to at least give them some access.
Okay, thank you. So for Michael and Dan, when you think about the policy landscape and what would be helpful or not helpful from an enterprise perspective, imagine that one of the things, I think Congressman Obernolte was getting at this, is that would be important is interoperability or consistency, whatever the standard is going to be, to the extent that it's consistent across the country and around the world, could be really helpful. Could you talk a little bit more about what else you would like to see?
I would love to, because I would echo the sentiment. For us, a disparate patchwork is problematic. And it's not just problematic for the two innovators in a garage. We innovate routinely. We are aggressively innovated in the right types of environments, sandboxes and so forth. And for us, so we have, if I remember correctly, more than 1 billion customers for Docusign across 180 countries, right? We represent or have customers across every level of federal, state, and local government, all the departments and agencies at the federal level, 25 of the Fortune 500 financial services companies, Docusign customers, 25 of the healthcare, Docusign customers, 20 of the technology customers, Docusign customers. The reason I mention this is we have a global scale which allows us to tap into literally hundreds of millions of contracts, right? These agreements that are anonymized, they are consented, they give us this rich amount of data that you can't just have a pop-up LLM do this is what's in a single document. That's not super helpful. But on an enterprise grade, where the customer demand is, and in some of these international markets, there's so much demand for what we can bring to bear. But if we had these disparate patchwork of legal and regulatory requirements, it's very difficult to innovate and invest with confidence. And we need to be able to invest with confidence and look out over the horizon and say, we have so much to bring to the market, we're going to get the ROI to do so. So I would echo that sentiment. I think it's especially important for us.
Can I just ask a quick question? How do you deal with 180 countries' legal frameworks?
Sometimes one at a time, unfortunately. What we do is we generally look to understand some of the leading frameworks that matter, right? So GDPR, CCPA, we'll look at how they're beginning to look at the ISO framework and the AI risk management framework and some of those pieces. And frankly, what we see is that some regulatory entities are more aggressive, and we have to account for that, right? And account for those risks. So there's a bit of a localization component. And then there are other pieces where, law does tend to lag behind technology at times. I mean that in the most respectful sense, right? But because of that, that gives us a little room to maneuver, to anticipate and engage in forums like this to understand what's over the next horizon.
Thank you.
And in some sense, it's not looking for identical rules in all 180 markets, but interoperability so that you can build once and deploy everywhere.
I actually think it has to be said that the international community is hungry for U.S. leadership in this space. And we've kind of left a vacuum in this way, but I think it's time that we engaged. Because if you look to countries, well, not just the EU, but countries like the UK and Australia, there's a void there where we can establish U.S. leadership in things like standard settings and international cooperation for the non-proliferation of malicious AI, for example, and really bring the worldwide community together in a way that enhances safety, number one, but also number two, eases the path for the deployment of AI and all of the gains in efficiency and productivity that come along with it.
And your bipartisan report really gets to that as well, because it's policy positions, some legislative, some not, but it creates a position that can be used as leadership abroad. Sorry, Dan, what do you want to see? And otherwise, I've got another question for you.
Well, I mean, aside from the policy bit, one of the things that our clients are challenged with quite a bit is every time they deploy an AI model, the next iteration of the AI model eats what they just deployed. And keeping up with the pace of the innovation is a challenge enough for many of our clients.
What kind of role do you see AI playing in workflows in companies? Where is it taking off the most?
Yeah, so we see, obviously, there are some industries that are moving forward faster than others, but I kind of think about this as a very general purpose, horizontal technology. And I'd say that there are 3 or 4 areas where it's having impacts the fastest, regardless of like what the workflow is. So for instance, in the coding space, I heard in the panel before, but AI is being used more and more to be able to supplement computer engineers and even allow some people that have no computer programming background to be able to go build applications with this new, vastly improving concept of vibe coding. So computer engineering is a space. The second is in the space of research. Obviously, with a lot of the deep research tools, we have some clients in their FP&A functions that are starting to now think, how can they look across their entire data landscape to derive better insights of how they can improve their profitability or improve the way they price their products that would take people weeks to do on an ad hoc basis. So research is a second one. The third one is around content preparation. You see this happening a lot in the marketing space where people are supplementing either the ideas that they want to take into the marketing process or how they can do better segmentation of personalization and customer insights. And then the fourth area is in the business analysis space. So I would say those are like 4 core skills, and they apply to many, many workflows across many industries. And when we think about it, it's like looking at the workflow, finding where in the workflow we're doing those particular jobs, and then figuring out how can we supplement people to be able to do that work faster so that people can go move on to more higher value added activity.
Michael, let me ask if you could pick up on that sort of last point of what do we need to do to make sure that workforces, or what do you see businesses doing well in getting workforces ready to use AI, both so that it helps them with productivity, but also because companies aren't going to adopt AI if they don't know how to use it?
Yeah, I think part of it is sort of, I hate to use the word transformation, but a bit of a cultural transformation, right? We want AI to be the partners in our workforce, right? We want it to not supplant the workers. We want it to team with them so that they can get out of the menial tasks, get into the more sophisticated, high-value work that they can really drive, right? The things, frankly, that they like to do. So how do you set conditions for that? So again, for us, part of this is start with responsible rollout. Understand the sources of the data provenance, understand the architecture, understand and implement meaningful guardrails, okay? When you get to this space, there's a tendency in conversations that I've seen historically for the security team to blame the legal team, to blame the privacy team, to blame the compliance team. And there's a whole lot of this going on, right? And yet, when you get the right people in the room and you have the conversation amongst, let's say, the CISO to CISO, the general counsel, there tends to be a lot of unlocking that can happen, right? It's like, okay, what are your concerns? Put them on the table. Let's talk about them. What are the guardrails? Where are you willing to accept a little risk, maybe a crawl, walk, run approach? Let's do a proof of value, and then let's go, right? And then do things like, well, let's implement a sandbox, because what I want to do here is allow my digital transformation team to innovate, okay? But I have to do it in a secure fashion, right? That doesn't put customer data or employee data at risk. Give me a sandbox so we can go and play and innovate and test, and then when we get to the right point in time, we can set conditions rolling that out. It's not actually that hard, right? I think there are some really important aspects of how you think about things like access privileges, right? What role or persona an agent has in agentic AI, and there's some real significant concerns about doing that well, but the execution doesn't have to be as complicated as people make it out to be sometimes.
All right, let's look a little bit into the future in the final 3 minutes that we have. Let me first ask Congressman Obernolte and Congressman Lieu, if you look out 5 years from now, what do you hope U.S. digital policy will look like?
I mean, I don't think we do a good enough job at articulating the optimistic case for AI adoption. And the optimistic case, and I know everyone's in the room is sitting, thinking about their own companies and the way that AI can enhance return on investment and productivity. But from a societal standpoint, there is a lot of fear out there, and we need to counter that fear with the optimism of what AI is capable of doing. AI is probably already the most powerful tool for the dissemination of human knowledge that mankind has ever existed. It can teach anyone anything they want to know in whatever learning style is optimal for them. But AI will probably also be the most powerful tool for the enhancement of human productivity that has ever been invented. And that's going to have profound consequences for human empowerment and the rise of prosperity in our society. And we need to talk more about that.
There's a line in our report that says, we don't know what we don't know. So 5 years is a very long time. I literally have no idea what the world's going to look like with AI. But I am going to tell you this story about why I believe, as Councilman Obernolte said, we should have a lot of hope. I was talking to a CEO of a startup in my district a couple years ago. And he's making this new computer chip for AI applications that's faster. And so we're talking. He also happens to be an immigrant. And at some point I said, well, how much faster is this computer chip? And he said 50,000 times. It's like, whoa. And I thought, I wonder if you would have waken up one day and said, I'm going to go to Moscow and do this. Well, there's no way, right? Because he says something bad about the government, he gets shoved off a 12-story window. Would you have gone to Beijing to do this? Well, there's no way, right? Because you get really powerful and have big business, they kidnap you and re-educate you. But he came to America and came to Southern California because he knew we had the rule of law, we had the talent, we had the venture capital, we had the resources and the people talent to allow him to execute his idea and help society. And I believe America will continue to be ahead of our peer competitors because we have a free, open, and democratic society.
Thank you very much. That's a great answer. So since we have 30 seconds, let me go to Dan and Mike with one final question. Despite Congressman Lieu's excellent point that we don't know what the digital world is going to look like in 5 years, what do you think the AI world will look like in 5 years? What's the business case that's optimistic?
I mean, I share the sentiment of it's very difficult to look 5 years out. But I would say we're really at this inflection point where it's very tempting with AI to look at what it does and say, can that do what a person does today? And stop the conversation there. I think the big opportunity is to say, now what can we apply this capability to go do and create durable competitive advantage as opposed to just automating what we do today. If we can take that path, and I think there is this real promising upside for growth, new innovation, new products, and a much more prosperous future.
Yeah, I think you're going to see this idea of agents or agentic AI magnified in a way that no one can comprehend right now. Like, I genuinely believe that is going to transform things in ways that are so dynamic and so unpredictable for good, as a general rule, not exclusively, but as a general rule, that I literally can't put a pin in what it looks like, but I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thank you all very much. Next time I'll ask about 5 months from now instead of 5 years from now, and even then, it'd be difficult. Really appreciate all of your insight. Thank you very much for